Bing, you see the shirt that Will got me?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Cuts.
Combines Game of Thrones, Jurassic Park, the color black, everything that makes me happy. You probably know that I collect T-shirts, and that's sort of like my thing. I really like graphic tees because I'm going to be Forever 12. That's the name of my store, by the way, Forever 12. But what you don't know is that I actually have, for every T-shirt, a matching pair of underpants. So Will actually had to go back and find Dracarys underpants for me. So I've got a little dragon in my pants. I'm not going to show you. Don't be weird. Okay, today we're going to be talking about, what are we doing today? Today we're going to be talking about getting wet and staying wet. And this is, if you ask, you can ask my wife, something I'm not very good at. But I've done my research, I've done my homework, and I'm practicing. And I want to help you stay wet. Because this is actually something that people have asked me about, keeping paints wet on the palette. There are so many factors involved. Are you painting indoors? Are you painting outdoors? Are you in a humid area? Are you in a dry area? And of course, your medium. That is a huge part of that as well. So I'm just going to cover the three basics. Okay, in my opinion, three basics are watercolor, acrylic, and oil. I'm not going to do caseins or caseins or concussions or any of that stuff, or acrylic gouache or egg tempera, or I don't know, barbecue chicken tempera. I don't know. You can temper anything, right? Or is it tempura? So let's start with watercolor. Now, watercolor doesn't need to stay wet in the palette. Watercolor is re-wettable by nature. So it is okay that watercolor dries. However, there are people out there that prefer to use that fresh from the tube watercolor that hasn't kind of dried into a cake. If you want to keep your paints wet longer, this is my little trick. And if you follow me on Instagram, and you look all the way back at one of my beginning tips, you can find this one. I'm using an airtight Magello palette here, okay? I love this palette. This palette is awesome. I just simply keep either a sponge, or because I'm in the studio and I was too lazy to go out and get a prop wet paper towel, it'll do the same thing. This will prevent the paints from drying out. Even though it's airtight, if I don't have any moisture in there, it will dry out much quicker. Now there is a word of warning, caution. You cannot take this, stick it on a shelf, forget about it for 6 months, and expect to come back and not only will it be dry, but it might be a little moldy. You have to take care when you're using water, because it's organic and you're probably not using distilled water, okay? You can treat water with like hydrogen peroxide. So I mean, no reasonable person's going to do that. I'm not reasonable. I'm not going to do it. Well, that just doesn't prove my point, does it? The point is that this will keep your paints wet. They don't need to stay wet for watercolor, but if you do prefer that, I would suggest this. And it also makes a great blotter, by the way, to have that sponge in there or whatever. And then what I would say is, after a week or so, just replace it, just rinse it out, or if it's paper towel, replace it, and that will keep them fresher much longer if you want to keep it wet. Now, acrylic paints, oh, I love and I hate them. Acrylic paints are awesome. I mean, they're so awesome, they're so versatile. But the kryptonite is they dry really, 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 really fast. So what is a girl to do? There are a few different ways that you can keep your acrylic paints wet longer on the palette. If you're using a regular palette, like let's say a disposable palette, you might jump into a medium, okay? So these are some options. And I'm gonna say this with peace and love, and please believe me, I don't come on here and push products hard or anything like that. That's not the point of this. This is so important. Water should be used for cleanup, not as a medium, okay? I said it in the water mixed with oil. I'm not saying that to sell you one of these things. I'm saying it because it ruins the paint film. The acrylic polymer will break down and it will not form that waterproof surface that you would want for acrylic, and it just unstabilizes the paint film. What can you use? Well, there are certain products like this palette wetting spray. Now, if you want to use a little bit of water, you can put a little water in a squirt bottle, okay? But again, very little, and I don't know how long that will last. This has got acrylic polymer in it. It will not ruin your paint film. It might make it a slightly thinner, but it will keep the paints wetter on the canvas longer. Now, we've talked about retarded acrylics before, but I'll bring it up again. You can use an acrylic retarder, which comes in various different viscosities. That's the biggest word I ever use. Viscosities. So this is going to be a more fluid. It's going to kind of thin out your acrylics, okay? This is a gel retarder, so it's going to be able to hold peaks. And then finally, this is a slow dry blending gel. Also, it's got a lot of structure to it. You see how it's not, it's moving slowly. So it's going to hold peaks. It's fairly thick if you want to keep the paints, or even thicken up some soft body paints, or, it will increase that feature. But, this is a big but. It's bootylicious. People ask me, like, well, how long is the retarder going to last? I'm like, it goes back to, it depends on where are you painting, what are you painting. There are a lot of factors. It should give it a few more hours at least of open time. And with acrylic paint, that's a big deal. Especially because, when you're looking at piles of paint like this, now this is oil paint over here, and I'm jumping around, but this is no big deal. But let's say that you are pulling some paint out. Now this will dry much faster because it's so thin. So just keep that in mind as well, is that's one of the factors, like, well, what are you painting? What are you trying to keep? What are you trying to save, these piles of paint, or are you trying to save the entire palette? You have mixtures, all that stuff. Going back to acrylics, I don't know why I did that out of order, but it just felt like the right thing to do. You have a few options. Now, one of the better known options is a stay wet palette. Okay? And a stay wet palette is like Tupperware. Listen, still good. My favorite line from Aladdin. So this is a stay wet palette, kind of like a little thing of Tupperware. It has special paper, and it comes with a couple different sheets because obviously after a few painting sessions, you'll probably want to replace it. This paper you need to basically soak in like really hot, if not boiling water for about 15 minutes, if not more. It won't hurt it to do more. And then you're going to submerge the sponge that's at the bottom, okay? You're going to submerge it, you're going to wring it out, then you're going to submerge it again, and then you're going to wring it out 50%. 50%. Okay, so about half a ring. You're going to put it back in here. You're going to save your extra paper to the side. You only need one, okay, of your wet, having boiled, wait for it to cool off a little, but not completely dry. And then when you're painting in acrylics, regardless of how thick or thin or whatever, this will keep your paints wet for a very decent amount of time, weeks, regardless of thickness. However, like everything, there's a cost. All magic comes at a price, dearie. Similar to the watercolor, you're using organic stuff. You've got water in here, okay? Now, it's not touching your paint, but it can mildew over time. It can form an odor over time. Now, if you don't want to stink, I'm going to show you something, my favorite thing, my option. What's Michael's option? Michael Goldstein, option. Is that my name? That's what it says in my underwear. So Jacaris, but I didn't want to lose it, so I wrote my name on the back. This is a product that is very near and dear to my heart for a couple of reasons. Mainly, when my grandfather was still alive, we had him in the studio. This is probably back in 2008. And he wanted to do some videos, product demonstrations. And this was one of his favorite products. So I got to film him doing a product demonstration on this acrylomizer palette system. And to this day, if you go on the Jerry's website and you look up the acrylomizer palette system, you'll see his video. Of course, the quality isn't, this beautiful quality you're seeing now. It's just special to me. This is a product that he loved, and so I've used. And he loved it for a reason, okay? There's no water. There's no gel or retarded things to add, okay? It's just the palette. And what it has is a gasket to keep it airtight, a big ass palette. You can even use this one as the top. And this will keep your paints fresh for up to 2 weeks. Up to 2 weeks if you keep it inside here, okay? Now, if you thin it out like we did here with the oils, okay, that might not stay wet. However, one of the great things about these palettes is that the acrylic, when it dries, it peels right off. So it's like not difficult to clean up. If you're going to be mixing, regardless of oil or acrylic, and you want to make sure that that mixture stays wet as long as possible, mix a little bit more. The more mass there is, the slower it will, oils, off gas or oxidize People always say, oh, they don't dry, they oxidize. And I say, shut up. I say, shut up. I don't care. I don't care about your fancy words. This isn't a fancy demonstration. Those are your options for acrylics, okay? Mediums, stay wet palette, the acrylomizer palette, which requires no water and no mediums, but it will keep your paints fresh for a considerable amount of time. If you are painting long painting sessions, I should say, and you have this open for a couple hours, it ain't gonna help you. So if you're painting for about 30-40 minutes, you should be fine. But if you're gonna be painting all day, you probably will need one of these mediums. It will keep it fresh when it's sealed, okay? Is that fair? Is that reasonable, Jamie, to you? Good. People want to know about keeping their oil paints wet on the palette. And oils, oils are the slowest drying medium out there. I mean, they take a long time to dry. In fact, if you wanted to varnish an oil painting, you're supposed to wait 6 months to make sure it's completely dry. It might be dry to the touch, on the surface, but if you varnish before that it's fully oxidized, it's not going to allow it to off-gas properly. You're going to be sealing in the wet. And I think I've said that before for some reason. It's weird, isn't it? How do people keep their paints wet for oil paint longer? Now, I will say in all fairness, even though I will probably be able to come back to this in a week and it will still be wet, it will start to form a skin that you'll have to kind of poke through to get to the paint underneath it. So what do people do? Well, some people will tell you to freeze your palette. I'm not going to tell you not to, but in my opinion, I'm going to tell you not to. It alters the painting film, and that's not good. It changes the molecular structure of the paint, and it won't necessarily will. And some of you are on there like, I've been freezing oil paints for 30 years. You are lucky, and I'm glad it's worked for you so far. But that one time that you use that zinc white instead of that titanium white, and it gets really brittle, really cold, you didn't know it was still frozen, you didn't know it was still a little cold, and it cracks on you, that's the gamble. That's the Russian roulette of painting. So what do I do? Okay, well, I will show you. It is not a very advanced system, but it is effective. Let me clean my palette knife, Will. I like to cover my palette, and you can also use this for acrylics, it used to be saran wrap, but now I love the future. Have you seen the future? I've seen the future, and in the future, we have a step above saran wrap. We have press and seal wrap. This stuff blows my mind. I love this stuff. It's got like these little, we don't sell this. I got this at Target or something, but I use this. I use press and seal, and I got this special, thank you for getting the holiday one, Christina. It's so nice of you. It's what they had left over. Yeah, snowman. It's like, do you want to build a snowman? I'm just trying to oil paint for a while. So what makes this so unique is that it basically, I know it's like, it forms these little, it's not sticky, but there's like these little air pockets that cause it to stick. It gets stickage. Oh, now I'm going to deal with that saran wrap issue. It's just, no. I will save it. Take this, put it over your paint, and seal it up. Because the less air that can get to it, the longer it will last. And with this stuff, you can literally make little pockets around each pile of paint. And you can see how it kind of forms those pockets. And you can put it over your wet paint here. However, I will say, and this is actually kind of a good thing, besides the fact this will slow the oil from drying, if you do it like this, whoops, over time, even in this, wonderful airtight, hermetic, like NASA designed system, it will dry slower, but it will dry and form that skin. When you take this off, it will peel most of that skin off, so your paints will be fresher. Now, the ultimate in keeping your paints wet, and not on my fingers, the ultimate in keeping your paints wet, I keep doing this, I don't know why, it's like my thing, I'm like a seal. The number one thing you can, the number one thing you can do is use your paints sparingly. I did say mix up a large pile of a mixture, but if you know that you're going to be using it for a while, you will need to do that. However, if it's going to be a shorter painting session, or you don't know how much time you're going to have or how big it's going to be, you can always put more paint out. It's very difficult to put it back. I've learned that the hard way. A little tube, and I'm like trying to get it in. It just doesn't work. That's the number one thing. Regardless of medium, using the amount of paint to the best of your ability of what you're going to need for the time will give you the most savings over time. But I know a lot of people like to load up their palette with color, and that's cool. It's cool. But you're going to have a little bit of waste, and that's just maybe some people need that for creativity. They like to see all that color. I'm not judging. It's whatever works for you. What keeps you wet at night or during the day? What do you like to do to stay wet in your painting? That's what I meant to say. Did I say at night? I want to know if you have run into issues with palettes drying out on you, if you have solved your palette drying issues. I'm sure some of you are going to yell at me and say, I freeze my oils and it's fine. It's also kind of gross, by the way. I don't want oil paint next to my corn because that's where I keep my corn, frozen corn. Anything in the freezer is going to be frozen. Tell me what you do to stay wet. That is an important thing to share. So keep your acrylic paints wet, your oil paints wet, your watercolors wet, and keep me on Instagram at Might Not Jerry. You thought I was going to say keep me wet on Instagram at Might Not Jerry, but that would be inappropriate, Will. And keep up with me on Instagram at Might Not Jerry, where I continue to post things such as pictures of my daughter and art-related stuff and funny memes that Jamie creates for me and behind-the-scenes footage, outtakes, various other things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will not end this video that way. You can take this stuff and put it over a glass of water and turn it upside down. It's awesome. Oh, that's literally what's on the box. Don't believe me? Ask Glad. Give me some water. We'll prove it. Let's test this out. Okay, let's try it. Cup drop. This stuff's cool. This has been a whole video promoting Press and Seal. We're not doing anything art related. It's like, look at this cool stuff. It's like a science video.